Alright, so it's the first time I'm using my canner this year. And I always go through and inspect it. One of the main things you got to do is your main vent hole here. Take a look through it, make sure it's not obstructed. So I'm good there. All my pop-ups, my blowouts are good to go. The other thing I do every spring, don't know that it makes a difference, but it don't hurt. These seals can get dried out, so I take a little olive oil and I just put a light coating of olive oil around the flange part of my gasket. And I might do that again later in the season if I do a lot of canning, but I always try to do that first of the year. Okay, so I've put some water in the bottom of my pressure canner. I'm going to start preheating that over here. And a mistake I made early on is I put too much water in here. The secret to this is you want more steam than hot water. It's different from hot water canning. So basically I get about 1 knuckle worth of water on the bottom of that. I'm going to start preheating that in the other burner. Alright, time to start sterilizing our jars. Use my handy jar grabber here. And there's different ways people do this. What I do is I'll put a couple of them in there, let them sit for a minute, fish them back out. Now I've got 3 pots of water going right here. One is just this big pot to scald my jars in. I've got another pot of water that is what I'm going to fill the jars with after I get them packed full of beans. Then I've got this one back here has my lids in it, sterilized. And I used to do this different ways before I had enough room to work. I just used a tea kettle before and fill the jar with water out of the tea kettle and then pour it from jar to jar, and that worked fine. This is just a little handier, a little less mess. Of course, you always want to be careful with the hot water, not scald yourself. Like that. And so what I'm going to do, after I get these 2 out of here, I'm going to take my kosher salt. I put a half teaspoon. A lot of people call for a teaspoon. I don't like it that salty, and I think a half teaspoon does fine. I throw a half teaspoon in each jar, pack them full of the beans, and then we'll come back. Okay, I've switched some things around. I brought my canner over here underneath the hood so I can pull a lot of the steam out. And now it's time to put some salt in the jars. And you may notice that I'm using a combination of wide mouth and small mouth jars, and that's for no particular reason. That's just the jars I had handy. And now we just start packing beans. I always jostle them around a little bit. Get as many in as you can, as few air spaces. Ideally, you don't want any beans sticking up out of the water. So the last little bit, you might have to poke some down in there. It is easier to pack in the wide mouth jars, I will say that. Normally, I would have just frozen this small amount of beans rather than go through all this for, it's going to be 3, maybe 4 jars, which isn't even a full batch in the canner. But I've got quite a few frozen, and I haven't canned any yet this year, so I thought I'd go ahead. Sometimes I'll put some onion in here with it. This time I'm not, because I got plenty of onion put up. I can always add them to taste later when we open up the jars. Looks like it's going to be 4 jars. Oops, and one on the floor. Worked out pretty good. Alright, so I got 4 jars. Make sure my heat's on full there. What I'm going to do, I'm going to wait till this gets hotter before I pack my jars so they're good and hot when they go in there. That shortens my processing time on this thing. So we'll check back in a couple minutes. Turn this off a minute. Okay, as you can tell by the steam coming out of here, we're getting pretty close to ready. And time to get my jars loaded and get them in the processor. So there's my water to go in my jars of beans. It's just come off boil, it's still very hot. So, just fill the jars. And I've got the drippiest pour cup in the world. Fill it to about the neck of the jar. I like to keep 3/4 of an inch or so of airspace, because the airspace is important. It's what makes the jar seal. And that one can take a little bit more. Now if you don't know how you guys handle your hot jars, but the way I've set up to do it, I've got one of these cooling racks, like for cooling pies and stuff, and I just put a towel under it, because especially when these jars come out of the canner, you don't want to just set them on any kind of counter you have, because they can crack it or burn it. Take my handy dandy magic wand, start fishing out lids. Oops, almost forgot. Always wipe your edge of your jars down in case there's any little grains of salt or anything like that. That'll prevent your lid from sealing. And I can turn that burner off now. Get me another lid. My rings on. I usually get them all started, then I go back and snug them up. You don't want to put them on super tight. Just need them to be snug. What I normally do is twist them down, back them off about a 1/4 turn, then snug it back up. use a hot pad. All right. Where's mine? Time to put them in the canner. And a canner, or a pressure canner, about like a hot water bath. One of the main things is you can't have your jars touching the side or each other when it's processing. That'll about guarantee you that your jars will break. Alright, so now I take my lid, and all these modern ones, there's a specific way to put the lid on, and it's got a marking here. You line up the arrows, and the reason for that is there's a safety catch here so that you can't accidentally open it while it's under pressure, which would be a bad thing. So I get everything lined up. There we go. Lock the handles down, and I put my little jiggler on top. And on mine kind of canner, it's got two different weights on here, and I forget the math exactly, but for green beans I want one weight on there, and that determines the amount of steam pressure. So I put that on there, and we'll check back when it starts dancing around, because that's when you start your timer. When this thing pops up and this thing starts dancing. So we'll check back then. So we're checking in with our canner, and you can see the steam pouring out, and that's starting to jiggle around there. Don't know if you can see that. Yeah. No, that don't help. Sometimes I'll give it, when it's starting to dance, when that pops up, it'll be a few minutes after that, and that'll start dancing. That'll take a few minutes sometimes. So that's trying to go. Well, we'll check back when it's ready. All right, so we're back. You see my jiggler is jiggling. So it's time to set my timer. I'm doing quarts, so that's 25 minutes. And one thing I'll do at this point, I'll back my heat off a little bit, because I want to keep that thing dancing to show that I got pressure, but I don't need to be blasting any extra steam into the room than I need. So we'll come back after 25 minutes. I shut off the heat, and I'll show you then, but I got to wait till this pops back down before it's safe to open. Okay, so our timer's gone off. I've turned my heat off, and on the electric burners I found if you can gently slide it away from the burner itself, it'll cool down a little bit quicker. You can see in the back here, but our little thing is still popped up, which is telling me leave it alone, walk away, and I'll keep checking on that. Whenever that pops down, I'll know it's safe to remove this without scalding myself. All right, my little indicator is popped down, which tells me my pressure should be about equalized. I'm going to take off my jiggler, and there's no roars of steam, so I should be good to open up the top. And remember, always take the lid toward you, something like this. And you'll notice that the jars really carry on when you take that lid off. That's because there was so much pressure in there. And they're boiling over pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and gingerly take them out of here and put them on my cooling rack. Being careful not to knock them on the side of the jar, because I'm not sure what would happen, but I don't think it would be good. You can see these are rich. Whoops, that didn't like that. Alright, I'm going to leave that sit a minute. Apparently when I squoze it, I loosen the band. Let me try this one. Try this one again here. Alright, there we go. And pretty much that's all there is to it. It won't take long for those lids to start making the popping noise that they seal. And some people leave the rings on. I always take the rings off as soon as the lids seal down good with that pop, and then dry them off good so I can reuse them. That's canning green beans. Easy as that.